My name is Ava Chen. I'm 30 years old now, but this story begins when I was just 24, fresh out of grad school, armed with dual degrees in finance and systems engineering, and a heart still young enough to believe merit alone could earn a seat at any table, especially this table, the Lancaster family boardroom, perched high above the San Diego Marina, wrapped in glass and old money. I wasn't just applying for a job, I was trying to find a place in my mother's side of the family. The Lancasters, an empire built on legacy, whispers of loyalty, and names written into contracts before birth certificates were even drawn. 6 years ago I stood outside this very building, wearing an off-rack blazer, and hope stitched into every thread. I thought my degrees, my drive, my bloodline would be enough, but I learned quickly how thin blood runs when it competes with entitlement. My Aunt Victoria Lancaster, matriarch, board chair and gatekeeper, rejected me in front of everyone. My cousin Marcus, the poster boy for nepotism, had smirked as she delivered the verdict. You're bright, Ava, but let's be honest, this world isn't built for outsiders. The room had chuckled, and I'd walked out with my head high and my heart in pieces. I didn't scream, I didn't protest, I didn't post about it online. What I did instead was vanish into strategy. I moved in silence. I used the bitterness they served me as fuel, not fire, and I began to build first a consulting firm, then a logistics group, then a network of partnerships and shell companies that quietly grew into something massive. What started as Vega X Consulting became VIXC Holdings, an entity so efficient, so integral, that even the Lancaster Group relied on us without realizing who was at the helm. That, of course, was by design. Now I was back. The Lancaster Family Executive Summit, held, as always, in their top-floor glass fortress, was underway. The same mahogany boardroom table, the same champagne flutes, the same smug faces, only this time, they were applauding their star performer, Marcus, who had just boasted about Lancaster's record profits thanks to their anchor client, VXC Holdings, my company, my doing, and they didn't even know it. I sipped my espresso to keep the grin from spreading too wide. VXC's contribution to our growth trajectory has been nothing short of transformative, Marcus said, clicking through another bloated PowerPoint slide. I remembered his voice from that day. Come on, Ava, you're smart, but you don't belong here. Victoria had nodded in agreement. Leadership stays in the bloodline, in the bloodline. That phrase had stayed with me like a scar that never faded. But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to take accountability, quietly, legally, strategically. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. Mila, Victoria's assistant, gestured politely. They're ready for your presentation. I stood adjusting the deep navy suit I'd had custom-made in Seoul, sharp, clean, nothing like the department store outfit I'd worn to my failed interview. As I stepped into the boardroom, Marcus blinked, confused. Ava, what are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. I looked him in the eye. I'm here on behalf of VXC Holdings. We need to renegotiate several contract terms before renewal. Silence swept across the room like a storm just beginning to form. The silence in the room clung to the glass walls like fog. Marcus tilted his head, the polished veneer of his confidence starting to crack. That's not how this works, he said, glancing at Victoria for backup. She leaned forward, her expression tightening. Wonder Excel Y sends a representative. We've never met their executive team. I smiled, stepping fully into the room. You have now. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elise, my other cousin, the one who once laughed when I asked to shadow a strategy meeting, dropped her stylus with a soft clatter. The weight of realization started to settle on the table. You can't be, Marcus began, but the sentence hung unfinished. I pulled up my presentation, wirelessly connected to their main projector. The first slide hit like a thunderclap. VXC Holdings audited revenue, a global presence in 12 countries, Fortune 500 partnerships, triple the income of Lancaster Group. The numbers weren't inflated, they were razor sharp, and every dollar accounted for. I've been operating under a different name, I said, voice calm. The startup you dismissed as cute was a shell. VXC was never small, you just didn't know where to look. They had underestimated me, because I let them, because I wanted to grow without their shadow. While they hosted gala fundraisers, and posed in glossy magazines, I was in the trenches, hiring the best minds, building tech that quietly replaced their outdated infrastructure. And when Lancaster Group began outsourcing logistics, I was already in the perfect position to catch their contracts, one layer removed, never revealing the source. Every time they praised VXC's efficiency, They were unknowingly applauding the niece they'd discarded. I glanced down at my tablet, where my team had pulled internal Lancaster files leaked by a former employee. Performance data had been falsified for months, losses masked, revenue deferred. Marcus had been dressing up a corpse in designer numbers. We wouldn't have known, he said suddenly, voice shaky. We did background checks. I didn't blink. And you assumed a Chinese last name meant no relation. You assumed wrong. Victoria's face drained of color, her lips parted, but no words came out. She had ruled that boardroom like a queen. Now she looked like she was witnessing a coup. I turned the next slide, a side-by-side breakdown showing how 82% of Lancaster's logistics revenue relied on VXC's systems, growth, retention, shipping. Their so-called success was scaffolding built on my company's backbone. I spoke clearly. This board has 5 business days to renegotiate all existing contracts, or I walk. Chaos erupted. Victoria stood so fast her chair groaned. You can't threaten us like this, she snapped. But it wasn't a threat, it was math. I was no longer asking for a seat at their table. I had built my own empire and their empire was leaning on it for support. As I walked back out into the hallway, I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. I felt steady. My assistant Michael was waiting, handing me a bottle of water. How'd it go? He asked. Exactly as planned, I said. Then I glanced back at the boardroom door. But the real meeting is tomorrow, and that's when everything they tried to hide will come to light. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't chasing their approval. I was preparing their audit. The next morning, I arrived an hour early. The same revolving doors that once rejected me now opened with a polite nod from the lobby guard, the same one who'd looked through me 6 years ago, like I was an intern who had wandered too far from the waiting area. Good morning, Miss Chan, he said, standing awkwardly, his eyes flickering with recognition. I offered him a kind smile and moved toward the executive elevator. Funny how respect blooms once your name sits higher on the contract than theirs. The marble floors echoed beneath my heels with a rhythm I'd earned. In the boardroom, my team was already preparing. Each of them had been strategically placed years ago. Analysts, consultants, legal advisors, even a junior accountant embedded quietly into Lancaster's finance department. All brilliant, all loyal, all mine. They greeted me with nods, calm, focused. Across the table, the Lancaster board shuffled in. The air was different today, tighter, heavier. Victoria entered last. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature but in certainty. Marcus trailed behind her like a ghost in a suit, flanked by 2 nervous corporate attorneys. I took my mise at the head of the table. Before we begin, Victoria said, perhaps a private word. I studied her. The woman who once reduced me to silence with a single glance was now asking for mercy in hushed tones. I shook my head. No more private conversations, I replied evenly. My team will walk you through the findings. It's best we're all on the same page. I nodded to my lead auditor, who began distributing thick reports. The sound of papers rustling was louder than any voice. Then came the sharp intakes of breath, the rustle of panic. One board member swore under her breath. This can't be accurate, said a director flipping through numbers, eyes wide. I let the moment breathe before speaking. It's not just accurate, it's evidence. Over $8 million buried under miscellaneous expenses, deferred revenue, shell payments, phantom invoices. This wasn't mismanagement, it was manipulation. I turned to Marcus. Would you like to explain? He looked down, lips moving without sound. His lawyer tried to object, but I raised a hand. Or we can fast forward to the inflated client metrics, the questionable inventory valuation, and the unfiled tax reconciliations from Q2 and Q3. A slow gasp moved across the room. Victoria's jaw clenched. Elise leaned forward, whispering to another board member. The attorney next to Marcus scribbled something furiously. I remained still, calm, no emotion. Let them panic. I'd done my worrying 6 years ago when I was told I didn't belong. Now, I was the gravity in the room, the voice they had no choice but to hear. Lancaster Group is technically insolvent without VXC's contracts, I added, and I have every legal right to walk away as of next week. You're trying to destroy us, Marcus said, voice cracking. I met his eyes. No, Marcus. I'm showing you what you already destroyed. I just kept you from noticing, until now. You could feel it, the shift. A legacy that once stood so proud was now creaking under the pressure of truth. The boardroom that had once been a stage for celebration was now a courtroom, and I held the evidence. I clicked to the next slide. It was a clean bar graph, but the message was brutal. 47% of your total revenue depends directly on VXC, I said evenly. Revenue that will disappear on Monday if I choose not to renew our contracts. A tremor moved through the table. Elise put her face in her hands. Victoria stared like the graph itself was an insult. What do you want? Victoria asked. Her voice was low now, controlled, but fragile. Gone was the matriarchal command. She was negotiating survival. I reached into my folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside are two options, I said, sliding it across the table. Option 1, Lancaster Group agrees to a full restructuring. Marcus resigns. Independent leadership is appointed. My team oversees financial recovery, and we maintain a scaled-back partnership under strict audit conditions. I let the sentence hang in the air like a drawn bowstring. And option 2? Victoria asked, though her voice had already braced for it. I terminate every contract. I report our audit findings to federal regulators. The SEC will want to know how $8 million slipped through your books undetected, and so will the shareholders. Marcus stood abruptly. You're bluffing, he snapped. You wouldn't dare. I stared at him, unblinking. You've spent years calling me unqualified. Marcus, why assume now that I'm lying? The color drained from his face. Around him, board members were already huddling, whispering, weighing which family member to sacrifice to stay afloat. This is revenge, he said again, desperation leaking from every word. You were never meant to be here. You don't understand family, loyalty. Family, I interrupted, my tone never rising. You mean when you laughed behind my back? When Victoria called me a PR risk? When you whispered to clients that I was too emotional to lead? I glanced around the table. Loyalty isn't silence in the face of corruption, and if you think this is personal, you haven't been paying attention. This is business, the very thing you told me I'd never understand. The gray-haired board member cleared his throat. Miss Chen, he said, this is an extraordinary situation, but given what you've uncovered, we may need to take immediate action. His voice was calm but final. For the first time, someone in the room looked at me not with skepticism, but with respect. Elise looked like she was about to cry. Marcus just looked numb, the quiet horror of losing what he thought could never be taken. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just let them sit in it. I'll be in the CEO suite, I said, collecting my notes. You once told me I wasn't fit for that role. Turns out you were right. I paused at the door. I wasn't fit to serve it. I was built to run it. And with that I left them behind, surrounded by spreadsheets and shattered illusions, watching the empire they'd gatekept for generations slip out from under their manicured hands. By the time I reached my new office, their old office, now reassigned to me, the messages were already flooding in. Missed calls from uncles I hadn't spoken to in years. Text from cousins pretending not to understand what had just happened. My father's message was the only one that stung. Do you have to humiliate them like this? As if I had rewritten their numbers. As if I had lied. I silenced my phone and turned to the window. The harbor looked the same as it did 6 years ago, but I wasn't the same woman standing here anymore. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. The board met again later that afternoon, without Marcus, who had been quietly escorted out with a resignation letter he didn't bother to sign. Victoria sat at the head of the table once more, but this time she didn't speak. She only listened, to legal counsel, to auditors, to the gray-haired director, who now called for a vote to approve my restructuring terms. It wasn't a debate, it was triage. By sunset, it was over. The Lancaster Group would enter emergency transition. Victoria would step down with full benefits, and an NDA. The empire wouldn't fall, it would be inherited, just not by who they expected. When I returned to the boardroom for the official signing, the energy had changed. Less arrogance, more acceptance. Marcus was gone. Elise didn't meet my eyes, and Victoria, tired and folded into her seat, finally asked the question I knew would come. Why now? She said softly. Why choose this moment to show your hand? I met her gaze. Because your company wasn't worth saving until it depended on something real. I gestured to the contracts, the audit, the team behind me. I built that reality. While you were measuring names, I was measuring results. Michael, my assistant, entered quietly with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. He set them down with that signature calm of his. It's done, he said. The contracts are restructured. Leadership's in transition. You now have full oversight for a 3-year term. I nodded, not to celebrate, but to confirm. Send the shareholder memo, I instructed, and archive everything we uncovered. If they try to rebuild in secret, I want every red flag ready before it waves. Michael smirked. They'll never get that far. As I walked the corridors one last time that evening, I passed a janitor who had once seen me crying in the elevator 6 years ago. "You're back," he said kindly. "Told you they'd regret it someday." I smiled. "I didn't want them to regret it," I replied. "I just wanted to never need them again." And now, I didn't. I paused outside the old internship wing, now silent, the walls bare. I remembered how it felt to be small here, and how much power there is in being underestimated. Back in my suite, I printed one last page, the rejection letter Victoria had sent me at 24. "You lack the leadership instincts required," it read. I framed it and placed it on the shelf behind my desk, not out of spite, but as a reminder that silence is a strategy, that rejection is data, and that sometimes the most powerful move isn't knocking on their door again, it's building one they'll have to walk through, hat in hand. The headlines came days later, quiet at first, then roaring. Lancaster Group restructures after internal audit, uncovers misreporting. Industry analysts speculated, reporters poked around with questions they'd never dared to ask before. But inside the walls of the glass tower, no one could deny the truth. The niece they once deemed unqualified now sat at the head of the empire's survival, and she wasn't asking for favors, she was setting standards. Victoria retired quietly, tucked away behind a press release crafted to sound dignified. Marcus vanished from the spotlight entirely, his LinkedIn marked open to opportunities. Elise tried to stay on, but the board voted unanimously to bring in external oversight. Per my stipulations, it wasn't revenge, it was repair. I didn't want to ruin the family name. I wanted to rebuild something that deserved the name in the first place. That's what real leadership is: quiet strength, measured decisions, and timing your rise with the patience to watch others fall under the weight of their own entitlement. My parents didn't understand it. "You didn't have to go this far," my father said over dinner a week later. "You could have found another way." But I had found another way. I created another way. I didn't walk through the door they slammed in my face. I built a corridor around the building and installed my own entrance. And when the time came, I offered them the chance to walk through it, or collapse behind it. That's not vengeance, that's vision. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the marina and painted the skyline in gold, I stood in front of the window where I used to imagine who I might become. And now here I was, proof that legacy means nothing without merit, that family ties can't strangle ambition, that rejection isn't the end, it's the beginning of a blueprint no one else sees. And when it's done right, they don't just respect you, they depend on you, not because you asked, but because you made yourself indispensable. Before shutting down for the night, I drafted one final message to the Lancaster family group chat. I kept it short, clean. "Don't worry about the family name, it's in qualified hands now." Then I muted the thread. Their panic, their guilt, their denial, it wasn't mine to manage anymore. Let them sort it out amongst themselves. I had bigger things to build. And for those watching, those listening, those wondering if they're the only one ever shut out, dismissed, or underestimated, hear this. You don't need their blessing. You don't need their permission. You need your plan, your patience, your power. And when it's time, your silence will speak louder than anything they ever said. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge is no revenge at all. Just success, built in plain sight, and signed with the name they tried to erase.